Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me, Paul, to come along this morning. As Paul says, I'm Chief Executive of AIRMIC, which is the UK Risk Managers Association. We have about 1,000 members in the UK, sitting in about 500 companies, and what I'd like to give you a little bit is the perspective according to the policyholder. We heard from Jonathan really largely this morning on the perspective according to the insurer. And in fact, in many ways, the perspective from the policyholder is rather similar. When Paul asked me to give this talk, I thought, well, what could I possibly say about international claims to international loss adjusters who clearly have fantastic experience. Everyone in this room has a fantastic experience. But when we've asked our members what their perception is about the claim service they receive, there are areas where they feel there's room for improvement, and I wanted to highlight those. In fact, when you talk to AIRMIC members about what would they perceive to be the issues in their careers that will define their careers, what they will tell you is that actually if they do a great broking deal, if their brokers deliver a fantastic renewal, that can help trigger a good bonus. But if a claim goes wrong, if a major claim goes wrong, they can get fired. And you can imagine actually which focuses their mind more effectively. What I'm going to base my remarks upon largely is the research that we do with the market, and in particular our members. So we have a lot of surveys, which I'll refer to. We do guidance for our members, which I'll refer to. But also we have a very close relationship with both the insurers and brokers and loss adjusters in the UK marketplace. So certainly based on those conversations. But I would stress that our members are all based in the UK, albeit most of them have international operations. So what I'm going to cover is what do AIRMIC members want based on largely discussions and surveys. I will pick up specifically the survey information from this year. We do an annual survey just prior to our conference in June, and there's some information I want to share with you about that. Tell you about some AIRMIC guidance that we've delivered over the last 12 months to members. For those of you who are not from the UK, I will just touch on the UK Insurance Act, which is quite a profound piece of UK contract law legislation which came through, or in fact became effective earlier this year. And I'd also like to talk about digital transformation, which is actually one of the issues our members talk most frequently about, is how they can maintain their focus on the rapidly changing risk profiles that they're all facing as their businesses transform in the digital age, fourth industrial revolution, and what that means to the insurance industry and what that's beginning to mean, I think, in the area of claims. And finally, just a few recommendations based on nothing but my own observations. So I say we're the UK Risk Managers Association. We have those number of members in about 450 companies. That fluctuates from about 450 to about 480. We have our members spend about 5 billion on insurance. Last time we were able to look, in addition to which they probably spend about 2 billion into their captives, which are very frequently part of the claims discussion. Most of our members are global. Almost all of them have international operations. Some are truly global, others are international. Most of them are larger companies with £1 billion of turnover or more, although in fact our fastest growing area of membership is below £1 billion. It's in the sort of upper middle market area. And almost all of our members represent complex organizations, complex structurally, complex in terms of reporting lines, and increasingly complex in terms of business models and use of technology, which is why I wanted to touch on that aspect. And we have full-time staff. We're lucky enough to have a strong team where we do most of our own research with the help of external bodies as well. So briefly, what do AIRMIC members want? And there will be no surprises on this slide for anybody. They want consistent global service. All of our members will be pitched by brokers and insurers that they can deliver consistent global service. and the proof of the pudding will frequently be on a major claim, and that's where we do get problems from time to time. Strong global coordination. When we look at what's happening within our membership, we find that those in-house teams that used to be sort of 5 to 10 strong are now 3 to 5 strong. Increasingly, they don't have the resource in-house to do some of the sort of supervision that they would like to do, and therefore they need more and more hand-holding. They have less and less resource in-house. Transparent and open communications. The most important thing that our members tell us is that they don't want surprises. They want to be told straight up front if there are any issues, and they want to be brought up to speed on a real-time basis. Underpinned, obviously, by effective and relevant protocols, which I'll come back to in a minute. A sense of urgency is certainly all of our members feel a sense of urgency within their own organisations. You can imagine that on a major claim, their CFO is breathing down their neck on a daily basis, and they need to respond in that sort of, with that sense of urgency, and maximum simplicity. Specifically, when the claim occurs, and a number of members have said this, there are probably 4 things that are most important to them. One is they want to have their expectations structured as soon as possible. In the same way that the insurers want to have their expectations structured, our members want to have their if there is a problem, they want to know about it right up front and start working on the solution to the problem rather than that emerging in the process at some later stage. They also want to work with their loss adjusters on a plan for interim payments. Clearly, cash flow is critical to all of our members, and they want to work on that plan. They want to request that the request for information into the client from loss adjusters is reasonable and based on reality. In many cases, the loss adjuster's request for information exceeds, either it's not explained in terms of why do you want that, or it's really, really difficult to get. And then there's a question of the credibility of the risk manager as it tries internally to try and extract information where everyone that they speak to internally says, well, why do you want that? How can that possibly be relevant to the claim? So really, it's important to, when you're asking for information from the client, to make sure that you absolutely, if it's not obvious why you want it, to make sure that you've got a really good story about why that should be critical. And the final thing is global coordination, because our members generally will not have a budget or the time to get on an aeroplane and go to a remote part of the world. They won't have met the loss adjuster locally. They depend on somebody here that they know very well, who's signed off as part of the claims protocol, maintaining oversight. And therefore, if you're sitting there in a local operation, please make sure that you're reporting back to whoever's the coordinator in London or wherever that may be in the UK, from a UK perspective. So that was, I don't think that anything that I said there would be any surprise to anybody. That's just common sense. I'm sure everybody does that. And if that were the case, then the survey feedback that we'd get from our members would give 100% positive response. However, this is the survey feedback. As I said, this is the June 2016 report. 21% of our respondents, where we get a very high percentage of response to our surveys in our membership, were concerned about unjustifiable delays in claims payments. In fact, that's slightly better than previous years, but the level of concern generally is in the sort of mid-20s. 25% of our members say generally that they've had a major concern about a claim over the prior 12 months. Recognizing that most of our member organizations are large organizations, they will have claims on a regular basis, so perhaps that's not unexpected. However, the free text, so we give our members the opportunity to actually use the English language in the surveys, and free text reference to delaying tactics and non-urgency, anecdotally worse on international claims than on UK claims. So there was some concern expressed there. Continuing concern, in fact, resurrection of the concerns that have been for the many years on reservations of rights. I think that sometimes there are some markets, I'm sure absolutely nobody represented in this room or anybody that knows anybody who's represented in this room, but some markets are more trigger happy with reservations of rights, and at that point it does transform the client's perception of the market, because they then feel they have to start appointing lawyers and they're in a defensive position, whereas they actually much prefer to maintain an open dialogue and talk about problems rather than insurers putting reservations of rights on. So we in AMIC have got protocols within the market, which many parts of the market observe in terms of the circumstances under which it's clearly appropriate to apply reservations of rights. But it's a red rag to a bull whenever it gets applied. Challenges on the basis of late notification. And the next two bullet points both have changed dramatically in 12 months. Firstly, the number of challenges on late notification went up from 28% of the challenges to 44% of the challenges in just 12 months. So that is certainly something which we've now absolutely focused on. Members are telling us that this is changing from their perspective in a negative way, and we need to look at that. Challenges on the basis of non-disclosure, on the other hand, have gone down from 25% to 11% in 12 months. Challenges on the basis of breach of basis clause or warranty breach or conditions precedent have also gone down slightly. So we looked at those results and we wondered what was happening, because actually, if you can imagine, for a number of years the results don't change very much. Yes, there's a level of dissatisfaction, but it's not getting worse or it's not getting better. Here, the overall level of claims challenges had remained consistent, but within that, dramatic change on 2 or 3 of the causes of challenges. So what are we seeing here? The answer is we don't know, but anecdotally what appears to be happening is that the insurers have already decided that they no longer can or want to rely on defence points from the old Marine Insurance Act 1906, which was UK contract law until August of this year, and now replaced by the Insurance Act, and I will come on to the Insurance Act in a moment. But what the defence points that they may have taken under the old Act are no longer available for policies in force, and I think what our sense is the insurers have chosen to effectively apply the new law before they needed to, which we thought was which we think is a good thing to apply, which is a more reasonable and balanced law. However, they are looking at other areas where they perhaps previously didn't need to challenge claims on those other areas because they had defence points under the old contract law, and are now choosing to take other defence points. So I'll come back to what that means for members and what AMIC will be doing about it in a few moments. We're also seeing far more focus on from our members' point of view, pre-inception, to getting legal advice on policy wordings and effectiveness of the cover. Far more of our members, and we haven't asked this question in a survey, but I would say probably now half of our members get legal advice on parts of the policy wording, whereas probably 5 years ago that would have been less than 10%. So if you look at all the best buildings around anywhere in the city, all the most shiny buildings, the top floors, all the ones with very high ceilings, they're all owned by lawyers who work for both the market and for the policyholders. So I mentioned AMIC guidance, and we've actually done a few reports over the years. We did one about 5 or 6 years ago, but this one we issued last year. And this came from we have a claims special interest group within AMIC, which is populated not only by our members, but also representatives from the market, and we look at issues that our members are concerned about. And what they told us just over a year ago, about 18 months ago, is look, we would really like your guidance, AMIC, updated in terms of how do we structure in a more formal way our interface with those people in the market who serve us from the claims perspective. So we set this out. This is a free download, by the way, from the AMIC website. You You don't need a membership. Just go to airmic.com and type in the search button Achieving Best Practice in Claims, and you can get this report. And what we did is we have two sections. One is, first section very much focused on our members' in-house organisation. So what do you need to think about within your own organisation in terms of how do you organise yourselves, what sort of protocols do you need in place, what sort of resources do you need, how do you interface with the external resources. And what we did is we took the guidance that we'd issued some years earlier, where we looked at the critical issues that differentiated the best performers in the market from the less well-performing parts of the market, which were these issues here. Culture and governance. So we looked at, when we looked into organizations, or when our members looked into organizations, their assessment of who they would select and how they would assess the response from those organizations were based on these headings: culture and governance, structure, infrastructure, which is very much sort of IT and data and speed of response, quality of the people and experience of the people, procedures and protocols, communications, data management, i.e. things like confidentiality and response times, and performance, monitoring of performance. So there was nothing really surprising. Again, when you download this guide, I don't think anything in there will be surprising, but what we were able to do is to capture in a sort of fairly comprehensive aide-memoire a checklist of things that our members should be looking at when they're appointing external advisors from a claims perspective. The second section of the report really looks at the interface between the in-house resource and the external world. So this is about maintaining relationships. What do you need to structure externally in order to make sure that the whole thing, based on what you have in-house, the resources you're relying on externally, how that works most effectively. So as you can see here, all about agreeing and recording all responsibilities, decision-making, escalation points, which is really critical. And one of the things, for example, that we do touch on is, in many cases, our member may not have the authority in every case to agree things, and therefore it may well be appropriate for the loss adjusters to agree beforehand if there's an escalation point where both sides need to get higher levels of authority, who would that be in the client, and how do we access them? So, getting involved with the CFO or whoever it may be. Creating a governance framework to oversee the effectiveness of the response. So in other words, if there are issues that are not being resolved satisfactorily, what is within the escalation procedure, what does that governance framework look like? Do we know who everyone's boss is, and how do we pull all that together, and under what circumstances would we do that? And then, of course, we do specifically highlight the international implications around laws, regulations, cultures, currencies, local parties being appointed, how they should be appointed, and access to necessary resources. So this is a free download. I commend you to have a glance at it, and please feel free to distribute it if there are anyone in your organisation who would like to look at it. So that's a bit of background on claims governance. I just really wanted to touch now on the Insurance Act. So for those of you who are not from the UK, how many of you are familiar with the workings of the Insurance Act and the implications of the Insurance Act? So in that case, it's probably worth a couple of slides. This is the most profound change in contract law, which applies to all policies issued under English jurisdiction, which is obviously everything in the Lloyd's market and everything issued in London, for over 100 years. So the old Marine Insurance Act was probably the most draconian anti-policyholder piece of legislation anywhere on the planet. We've been campaigning for at least 5 years at government level and within the industry for reform, and we were pleased to see 2015 effectively it was reformed and replaced by the Insurance Act 2015, which came into force in August this year after a transitional period. And there are 2 or 3 major changes which perhaps you need to be aware of for any policies that are written in English language. And the first is around policy disclosure. So as I said in an earlier slide, many of the challenges that we had seen coming into our members were based on non-disclosure. Not necessarily going to trial, because the position at law was so draconian that very few went to trial. And the position was, if there is a non-disclosure of a piece of material information, which the underwriter would regard as material, potentially the underwriter could have avoided the entire policy, not only avoided the claim, but avoided the policy and demanded a return or a refund of any claims previously paid. You know, you can imagine how draconian that was. Our members told us that the obligations under that old act were impossible to comply with. 85% of them, 85% of our members said they could not comply with the disclosure obligation under the old act. So all of them were living with policies that potentially may not pay out. The only reason that system worked was because the goodwill of the insurance industry recognized that if they were to apply the law, the old law effectively, then insurance would be unsaleable. It would just absolutely wouldn't work. And the insurance industry came to recognize that, and therefore the new law, which is balanced and fair, came into force this year. And there are 2 or 3 pieces of it which you probably need to know. One is a completely different hurdle in terms of disclosure. So words like a fair representation of the risk, not a total representation of every single aspect of the risk worldwide, but a fair representation to enable the underwriter to understand the risk. Based on a reasonable search, or which may be reasonably revealed to the policyholder and therefore to the industry based on a reasonable search. So reasonableness coming very much into it. And the presentation accessible in a clear and accessible manner. So it is most unlikely now that you'll have, or under most circumstances, certainly for AIRMIC members, you'll have a set of circumstances where non-disclosure going forward is likely to be an issue in terms of a major claim. I mean, it still could be the case, but that hurdle is much lower. And the penalties for a breach are much more reasonable, so they're all proportionate. They're all aimed at putting the insurer back in the position they would have been if that piece of information, in the case of an innocent non-disclosure, that piece of information had been available at inception. So if the insurer would have, if they'd known that factory was near to a source of flooding, they would have imposed a $500,000 deductible, then they can retrospectively impose that deductible if they can demonstrate that would have been their normal underwriting policy. So it's based on clear and reasonable. The other bits that are changed is basis clauses. How many people know what a basis clause is? Well, those of you who don't, you never have to know, because they've been banned by law. They were a nasty self-destruct button, which were in most policies, that said if there's any information whatsoever that had been given to the insurer, however irrelevant, which, and the language had to be, forms the basis of the contract, even if it was not relevant to the risk, but it was wrong, then the insurer could avoid the policy in its entirety. They hardly ever used it, but it was, in fact, generally it was only ever used if they suspected the insured was being fraudulent, but it was so bad that it's now been made illegal. So you don't have to learn that one. The changes of warranties. Now, warranties under the old law could never be remedied. So if a warranty is that you had a working fire alarm and it didn't work for 24 hours and then it worked, the policy had already been avoided. So even if it was working again, then there's no possibility of making a claim. And obviously, clearly it was unreasonable. Hardly any insurer has ever invoked it, but now the warranty is suspensive, so it only applies where the breach is actually still in place, and as soon as the breach is remedied, the policy comes back into force again. and the warranty breach must be relevant to the loss. So it's inappropriate and will not be upheld at law if an insurer tries to avoid a flood claim on the basis of a non-working burglar alarm, which was the subject of a warranty. So that all sounds good. We are concerned that the insurance industry is trying to now replace basis clauses with conditions precedent. We're seeing more and more of those come in. Some of them are reasonable and some of them are unreasonable. So this is our next area of focus where we're going to be trying to represent our members' best interests. I'd just very briefly like to talk about digital transformation, because this is the number one issue facing our members at the moment. Going back to that survey in June, we said, what's keeping you awake at night? Number one and number two were cyber risk. Number one was cyber business interruption. Number two was data breach. And almost all of our members say that their organizations are planning a digital transformation. Almost all of the member companies that we have are looking at competitors, either in California or wherever they may be, Ubers and Alibabas and Amazons and Googles and any other organization that's trying to disrupt them, Airbnb, and they are looking at their own digital transformation, which is transforming the risk profile of many of our member companies. And our members are really, really focused on how can they keep up with it. And their observation is that the insurance industry is moving faster than it's ever moved before to try and respond to the digital disruption, but the real world is moving faster than that. And therefore, actually, the insurance industry's response is going further and further behind where the real world is in terms of digital exposures. So what are the implications of that? The implications of that, for example, are that if you look at the stock market valuation in almost any Western country or developed economy, the percentage of the value of any company is now represented by intangibles as opposed to physical property. The S&P, last time we looked at it, S&P 500 in the States, 80% of the value of the S&P were intangibles, things like brand, reputation, intellectual property, technology, software, R&D, nothing to do with physical assets. And of course the insurance industry is trapped at the moment in the 20% of physical assets. They can insure factories, they can insure businesses, business interruption, but they're really struggling to develop a response to the digital transformation. So it's on the top of our members' keep awake at night. Increasingly, it's getting more difficult to distinguish between physical and digital assets. For example, software is, it's real, it's tangible, it's costs money, it can be disrupted, but it's really difficult to see that it's been destroyed in a physical way. So I think the skill sets required by the insurance industry and the whole entire profession, including the loss adjusting profession, will need to respond to what's actually happening in this world. Just sticking for a second with what the challenges are that we're working and talking to the insurance market about is definitions of assets in policy wordings, either to specifically include digital assets or to specifically exclude them. A lot of policies that we look at are silent on that, which I think is a trap for the insurance industry to fall into, particularly with a systemic loss, major loss, involving mass penetration from some hostile power or whatever it may be. A lot of cover is sitting in conventional policies that are unrecognized by underwriters, and that could be a real issue. Challenging and proving business interruption losses through digital causes. I think a lot of work needs to go into that, and that's something we'll be working with our claims and business interruption special interest groups. Proof of loss of various digital assets, including intellectual property, where there's been no physical break-in. You don't have safes anymore with designs and R&D, it's all technology. And how do you respond to that? And therefore, how rapidly can the cyber insurance market respond to this changing world? So that's a real area of focus, and although it's not specifically or it's not only related to claims, it's something we wanted to just touch on as an area of interest for us. So wrapping all of that up, as I said at the beginning, based on nothing much but observation, what our members tell us, what they say good looks like. They're saying for the loss adjusting profession specifically, but at probably this list would apply to brokers or other organisations they work with, like TPAs. It really important, and I put it as number one for a good reason, for everybody to know the client's business. They want to share. All of our members say, look, we have professional relationships with these external bodies, our brokers, our loss adjusters. We want to tell them everything they want to know, everything that can help them serve us better. We want to share with them. Getting to know the business, expressing clarity in all of the protocols, that no surprises, everyone knows what's going to happen in predictable sets of circumstances. We're spending a lot of our time with our members working on how they scenario plan, and very much part of the scenario plan is to think about the consequences with the insurance market and how they would respond. And by the way, we did a scenario plan guide for our members in June of this year, and that's a free download on the website if anyone is interested. Assessing policy coverage issues from the outset. If there is anything that is worrying you, Houston, could you please say right up front, rather than slapping reservations of rights on, let's have a conversation and see the extent to which it can get resolved before it becomes a problem. Maintaining momentum and transparency. Nobody wants secrets, no one wants periods of silence. Flag up any constraints at an early stage, which may include a constraint that they say, look, we the loss adjusters are worried that you, the client, are not providing us with this essential information, and until you do, we cannot do this thing. Put pressure on clients to respond on your behalf. And engage with senior decision maker. As I said, many advisors, brokers, loss adjusters are a little bit hesitant to ask for that interview with the CFO or the risk manager's boss. And I would suggest that that's a conversation that could take place much earlier in terms of under what circumstances should that take place, because that can often resolve some of the problems. And my final thought is every challenge on a claim probably comes into one of two categories. First category is there was nothing that could have been done about that right from inception. That type of insurance doesn't exist. That set of circumstances could not have been covered. And that's just really all that is about restructuring the client's expectation. Look, you've just put in a claim for something that could never have been covered. It's not within the contemplation of the insurance industry to cover that. I'm very sorry, you're not going to get that claim through. And therefore, it's an open conversation. But the other category is where the placement could have responded to this set of circumstances and hasn't for some reason. And in my view, that's a failure of all of us. It's a failure of the risk manager, it's a failure of the broker, it's a failure of the underwriter, because we need to create in support of the reputation and brand of the insurance industry, we need to make sure that where cover is expected to be there, it will be there and the policy will respond. And so the loss adjuster will very often be the first one to see that the insurance industry in its entirety, including our members, have failed to, in some particular regard, and we need to find a way to get that information back into the mix so that next time that doesn't happen. Doesn't happen certainly with that client, but if possible, that doesn't, as a set of circumstances, it won't happen more broadly with other clients as well. So that was all I had by way of prepared remarks. I think I probably got no time at all for questions. Yeah.
You refer to the Insurance Act. Let's move on to the Enterprise Bill, which comes into effect next May. And in regards to what are AMEC's views on clients now being able to sue an underwriter if they don't believe that they've paid the claim in good time and get compensation. I would have thought that your members would think that's a good thing. I'd appreciate your opinion.
Yeah, well, we supported the Enterprise Bill. We supported it on the grounds that we didn't think it was appropriate, that there could be no consequence whatsoever on an underwriter failing to pay a claim in good time. So there was no consequences. However, when we consulted with our members, we could not find a single case where that had ever happened. Our members' feedback was, we have such good relationships with our market, we cannot imagine we would ever be in a situation where we'd take advantage of the enterprise, then bill, now act. So although we support it, we think it's very much in principle. We think it's right that there should be consequences if an insurer, through bad faith or whatever it may be, doesn't meet a claim in a reasonable period of time. There should be consequences, but we don't think it's a big deal for our members. So we think it's, that maybe there's a space in the...
Change that, bear in mind that they have that opportunity. I think they might be looking more to that.
Well, possibly, but the other part of the equation, and we've had legal advice on this, is in order to be successful in suing an insurer for delaying a claim, they will have to prove damage. So most of our members can go to their bank and say, look, we've got a claim here, we think it's valid, the insurers haven't paid, can you lend us, $10 million or whatever it may be in the meantime? And they actually therefore suffer no damages other than an interest payment on the $10 million. And they could always, in the past, have claimed the interest anyway. So it was purely the damages. So when we look at the scenarios, we cannot see a scenario where it's likely our members would be successful.